Hi guys, it's Ade from Kiddies Droid, and in this video we'll be working on 5 JavaScript projects for beginners. I'm going to be showing you how to create your very own to-do list using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So we're going to start off with the HTML code and h1 tag, and in this h1 tag I'm just going to put the name of my list. You can decide to put whatever you want to put there. So next is an input tag. This is where you type things you want to add to your list. I'm going to be adding an ID of input. This is going to be useful later. So next I'm going to be adding a span tag with a class of add button. This is the button you click on to add the things you write in your input to your list. Now please know I already have a CSS file created for this project already. So if you need to get my CSS file, you can just click the link in the description. So now I'm going to be creating a sample list item. I am doing this so you can see what the to-do list item is going to look like. So here I have a UL tag. This UL tag is going to hold everything concerning our list. Now next up is the div tag. Now from the starting of that div tag to the end of that div tag is the whole list item. What that means is that whenever we try to add a new list item to our work, our JavaScript code, which we are going to write soon, is just going to create a new div which is going to hold an li tag and also a span tag inside of it. The li tag there is the one holding the text you add to your list, while the span tag there is working as a button you can use to delete that list item. So let's see our to-do list on the browser. Please be reminded I already have a CSS linked to this project already. If you want to get that CSS file, you can just click on the link in the description. Now let's move to the JS part of this work. So here I'm going to be creating a function, and the name of that function is going to be new element. Then we're going to have to switch back to our HTML code. On the first span tag, which has a class of add button, I'm going to be adding an event listener there, the onClick event listener, and I'm going to be putting the new element function inside of it. So what this means is that whenever I click on that add button, it's just going to call the new element function in my JavaScript code. Here I'm creating a variable called UL, which is going to get the UL tag in my HTML file. Now before I start writing the codes, let me explain what JS is supposed to do here. So the first step is when the user writes into the input tag, our JavaScript code is supposed to go and pick what is written in that input tag. The next is supposed to create a new list item, and if you remember, a new list item consists of a div which is going to hold an li and a span tag. So let input equals to document.getElement by id input. So remember when we put the ID in the input tag here, so this is what we're using it for. We're just going to call it in our JS. So we are calling it here now, and we're putting it to a variable called input. But now we don't just want the input tag, we actually want the value inside the input tag. So I'm putting the value method here. Now because of the kind of project we are working on, we'll actually have to create tags. Now creating tags through JS is not actually hard. So here I have document create element. We use the create element attribute to create tags, HTML tags to be precise. So here I'm creating an li tag. Next up I'm going to create a div tag. So it's still the same process again. Let div equals to document.createElement div. Now li.inner HTML equals input. Now inner HTML is used to set the HTML content of an element. So what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to set the HTML content of that li tag to input. And if you remember, input, we've collected input before, and input is just going to get whatever the user writes in the input tag. So next I'm creating another tag, the span tag. So let span equals to document.createElement span. Okay, so I'm not just creating random tags, I'm creating the tags that are actually going to be in a new list item. Remember the div, the li and the span tag. If you go check your HTML again, I'm creating those 3 tags all over again. Now the next step is to add the class of close to the newly created span tag. So I'm going to use the class name method span.class name equals close. With this, I have added a class of close to that newly created span tag. This class of close here. Now I'm just going to write a line of code to put that X character into the span tag. So now div.append child li. The append child method there adds a new element as the last child of an element. What that means is I'm trying to put that li tag into the div tag. So next I'm going to be appending the span tag also. So div.append child span. Now the next step is to finally append that whole list item into the UL tag, and if you remember I've gotten the UL tag on top already, so I can just do ul.append child div, and don't forget div is holding both the li and the span, and I'm putting that div into the UL. So now when I write something into my input tag and I click on the add button, it should actually add it to the list. So as you can see, the function new element is doing its work there, adding whatever the user writes in the input tag to the list. Now what if nothing is written on the input tag and the user still clicks on the add button? What should happen? So we should be able to tell the user that he or she must write something before he can use that add button. So for something like this, we will need an if statement. That if statement is going to check if something is actually in that input tag or not. So here I'm going to put if input.length is strictly equals to 0. So we're going to check if the amount of characters there is equals to 0. That means it's empty. So if input.length is strictly equals to 0, alert, let's say you must write something. So in the else statement, we can now put the ul.append child div back. So let's test this on the browser now. So now I'm not going to write anything inside, and I'm going to click on the add button. As you can see, my browser is asking me to write something. Now another way to actually make our to-do list look cooler is if it automatically removes what is written on the input tag after the add button is clicked on. So document.getElement by id input.value equals to empty strings. So let's see it on the browser now if it actually works. So as you can see, it automatically removes what was written on the input tag before. So the user does not actually need to backspace every time the user wants to add something new to the list. Now the next phase of this to-do list project is working on the delete button for each of the list items. So here I'm going to create a variable called close, and that close is going to go and get every span tag that has a class of close on it. Now the reason we are using document.getElement by class name is because we can't say for sure how many list items we are going to have in our work. Each user will probably have different amount of list items they want to add to their to-do list. So here I'm creating a function, and the name of the function is going to be remove items. Now I'm going to have to create a loop, so I'm going to use the for loop. So let I equals to 0, I less than close to a length I plus plus. So this loop is going to be run for the amount of elements it can find inside close. So here let's imagine a scenario where we actually had like 5 list items in our to-do list. That means we would also have 5 spans that add a class of close on them. So since this loop is going to run for the amount of close to a length, so that means it's going to run 5 times. So it's going to be close 0.onClick. So it's going to add an event listener to that element. Now the code that's going to run is going to be this.parent element.remove. This there is just referring to the element itself, that close 0 at that point in time. And parent element is just referring to the tag which span is inside. And if you go back to your HTML and check, you will notice that span is inside the div tag. Then next we have the .remove method. The remove method there is just used for deleting a node. So we are deleting the div, and automatically when we delete the div away, we remove the li and also the span. So let's test this out in our browser now. So I'm just going to write something, add, and I'll try to delete it. Now if you can notice, the function is not working. Why? because it has not actually been called in our code. We just created a function, but we did not call that function. So now I have to go back into my code to call the function. So this will be the most suitable place to actually call this function. Now the reason why I put it here is because the to-do list is always going to be updating. That means the number of span tags is always going to be increasing. So we actually have to call that function every time we add. So that is why I put it into that new element function. So whenever we click on the new element function, automatically we are calling the remove items function. Now the next phase of this project is going to be checking and unchecking the list items. Now this is almost going to be similar to the remove item function, so it should actually be easier to write. So I'm creating a variable called list item, and now this list item is going to go and get every li tag in my work by their tag name. So I'm creating a new function, and the name of this function will be add check. So I'm going to create the loop that's going to run through all the li tags. So for let li equals 0, I less than list item dot length. Don't forget, list item is the one going to call every li tag by their tag name inside my HTML. So next is the list item idle on click. That was the same logic we used in the remove items function. Now the function that is supposed to run when we click on any of the list item, this.class list.toggle checked. Now by now you should understand the this keyword. The this keyword here is just referring to the element at that moment in time, while the class list is just accessing the class of that element. The toggle method here is just used to remove or add a class name to an element. So if check was present, it's going to remove it. If it's not present, it's going to add it. So remember, the add check function is just not going to start working automatically on its own. It has to be called. So I'm going to put it into the new element function. So whenever you click on the add button, both the remove item function and the add check function is going to be called. So let's go try this out on our browser now. If you want any of the files we used today in this project, you can just click the link in the description.
Now that we are done with the to-do list, let's move straight into making a basic calculator.
In this video, we'll be creating a simple calculator using JavaScript. The calculator we're about to create is just going to be limited to addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we're going to start with the HTML. Let's first of all create the structure of the calculator. So I'll be creating this calculator with the use of the table tag because it will be so much easier. Now with the stuffs I've put down, if there's any need to explain them, I'll come back to explain them. So on my line 17, I'm about to start putting down the buttons of the calculator. I have done one already. So here I have an input type of button, value inside of 1, and an event listener, the onClick event listener. Now on that event listener, I have passed in a function called the display function, and I also passed in an argument 1. What this means is that whenever I click on this button, it is going to call a function and pass in 1 into that function. Don't worry, later on in the video I will explain what this function does. So now that we understand that, I'm just going to replicate the button and do it for all the other values of the calculator. So this is what our calculator finally looks like, but it is not yet functional. So we're going to be ending into our JavaScript to make our calculator functional. If you will need any of the files for this video, you can just click the link in the description below. You can also find the CSS file there, which I did not put in this video. Now the first thing I'm going to be doing is to create the display function. Now I'm going to be passing in a parameter called value because this function is going to be taking in arguments. So next, document.getElement by id result.value. Now earlier in my HTML, I created an input tag with the ID of result. This input tag is supposed to display whatever the user clicks on the calculator. So now you should understand why I'm trying to get it in my JavaScript. So the result plus equals value. So whenever the user clicks on any of the keys of the calculator, it just adds it to the previous value there. And we should already know by now that since the numbers are going to be picked from our HTML, they are going to be in string format. So they are going to be concatenated together. That means they will just be side by side, not actually added together. So now before I go into the JavaScript, let me explain what this next input is doing. Now when this input tag with the type of button value of C, this input tag is supposed to work as the clear button. Like when you click on it, it clears whatever has been written in the calculator. Now on this input tag, I've given it the onClick event listener that calls the clear screen function where clicked on. So let's go create this clear screen function in our JavaScript. Okay, so before we create the clear screen function, let me explain the new function that you can see on my code now, the function calculate. Now with the function calculate, I have var p equals to document.getElement by id result.value. I'm sure you understand that by now. It's just getting everything the user must have written. So next I have var q equals the var p. Now the eval method is a function property of the global object that evaluates strings and returns the value. What that just means is that if we imagine that p was 1 plus 1 and you eval p, it will just return 2 back to you. So I put eval p into q. Whatever p was, eval has evaluated it and returned it back to q. So after that, I have document.getElement by id result of value again equals to q. So the evaluated p should be returned back into where the user can see the answer. Now let me show you how function calculate is actually called from the HTML. As you can see, the function calculate will only be called when I click on the equals to button. So let's now create the last function, the function clear screen function. So now document.getElement by id result.value equals to an empty string. What we're just doing is whenever we call the clear screen function, you just equate the entire input to an empty string so that it becomes clear. So let's finally test out our calculator. As you can see, our simple calculator is working fine. If you need any of the files for this project, you can just click the link in the description below.
Our next project now in this video is going to be a random password generator.
In this video, we'll be creating a random password generator. I'm sure from the name of the project, you already understand what a random password generator is. So this password generator just has two buttons on it, a generate button and a copy button. The generate button is supposed to generate 12 random characters, and the copy button allows us to copy the text generated and paste it anywhere we want to paste it. Now that we get the idea, let's go write some code. So we're going to be creating our password generator with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So make sure you have your HTML file, your CSS file and your JavaScript file. Make sure they are all linked properly. Okay, so for the course of this video, I will only be doing the JavaScript. If you will need to get the HTML and the CSS file, you can just click the link in the description below. So in the code, the first thing I'm going to do here is going to create a function, and I'm going to call it gen password, like generate password. Okay, I'm going to write it in camel case, gen password. So this is the function that will be called whenever we click on the generate button on our browser. Okay, so we know we are dealing with passwords, and we know passwords can take in letters, numbers, some special characters. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to declare a variable var chars. That's the name of the variable is chars, and I'm going to put every letter, every number, and the special characters that I know are proper. So that will consist from 0 to 9, your small letter, A to Z, your special characters, and also capital letters also, because small letters and capital letters are not the same thing in JavaScript. Your browser does not see them, they are not the same. So on the next line, still in that same function, I'm going to create another variable called this password length. Password length is just how long you want your password to be. I told you at the beginning of the video that my password generator was creating 12 random characters. So if you wanted yours to create 20, you know what to just do, change 12 to 20. If you want it to be lesser, reduce 12, but I'm going to use 12 for this video. So I'm creating another variable. I'll call this variable password. So we're just going to make password empty, an empty string. So next we're going to be creating a loop. We're going to use the for loop, because why? A password generator is generating random characters. Most likely projects like this, a loop will always come in. So var I equals 0 anytime I is less than or equals to password length I++. Now looking at this loop already, you can see that this loop is supposed to run 12 times. Why? Password length was 12 and we said var I equals 0, starting point of I is 0. So anytime I is less than or equals to 12, which is password length I++, so this loop is going to run 12 times. So as I said earlier, if you wanted 20 characters, this loop will run 20 times since your password length will be 20. So now inside my loop, I'm going to create another variable. That variable will be called random number. So this is the part of the code that is actually going to create random numbers for us. Now we're going to be using some inbuilt JavaScript functions, mostly the math functions. So I'll write now and I will explain them to you guys. So here we have var random number equals math.floor into bracket math.random times chars.length. So I'll start with the math.random function. Math.random function generates numbers for you between 0 and 1. So that means you'll be expecting some decimals like 0.2, you get 0.0 something as generated numbers. Then we have chars.length. By now you should understand what the length property is doing there. If you don't understand, the length property there is just going to count the amount of characters inside chars, and you can see on my line 2 the amount of characters I have there. So that amount of characters is what is in chars.length. Now back to the code. Now we now add math.random times chars.length. So let's imagine like if math.random actually generated something like 0.2 and chars.length was actually 5. So we would have 0.2 times 5, which is 1. Now, the main reason we are actually multiplying math.random with a number here is because we're actually trying to limit the range of numbers that actually occur. Now, I already said math.random generates number from 0 to 1 for us. So let's imagine it generates 0. So that is going to be 0 times 5, which is 0. And let's say it actually generates 1. 1 times 5 is 1. So imagine all the other decimals in between 0 and 1. You are very sure that they can't pass 5 anymore. So if we have limited the range of math.random with that multiply by 5 we have there. So if you wanted to create a range of 20, you just do math.random times 20, because you know that if it generates 1 times 20 is still 20. If you want to do a range of 1000, you know what to do. Math.random times 1000. So even if you have math.random generating 1 for us, it will still be 1 times 1000. If it's math.random generates 0, it will be 0 times 1000. So all the decimals in between 0 and 1 cannot pass 1000 when multiplied with that number. So now what's left for me to explain here is the math.floor function. Now the math.floor function just approximate numbers for you. So like if math.floor took in something like 2.16, it will just approximate it to 2. If it took in 4.7, approximate it to 5. So we are putting it because math.random does not actually generate whole numbers. It generates number from 0 to 1. So decimals are going to be in it. So if math.random generated something like 0.54, now 0.54 times 5 is something like 2.16. So we can't take in 2 because we need an whole number for what we're about to do. So that's why I added math.floor. Math.floor was just going to approximate that number to the nearest whole number. Okay, so since we understand all I just said now, so let's continue with the code. Okay, so here on this line I have password plus equals chars.substring random number plus 1. So the first I'm going to explain here is the plus equals there. Now the plus equals there is not the same as the normal equal to we'll be using, since the equal to is you know it as your assignment operator. But now the plus equal is just like we're trying to add to our password, not actually redeclare it. Add and redeclare at the same time. So that's what the plus equal to is doing there. We are adding and redeclaring at the same time. Now I'll give us an instance now. Let's say we add password plus equals to 5. Now what we just mean is put 5 inside password, because at the beginning of our code password was nothing. Password was an empty string. So password is now 5. Now if somewhere else in our code we now have password plus equals 10. Now what we are saying is add 10 to password. That is 5 plus 10. Not just you declare password to be 10. That means whatever was in password before, add it to it now. So that is 10 plus 5. So we're just adding to password. We are adding to that empty string that is there. We are not redeclaring password. We are adding to that empty string. Now, since we understand what the plus equals to mean there, now I'm going to explain what substring is doing on that line. Now we wrote chars.substring. So that means we're actually referring to the chars we created earlier. That chars that is holding all those characters. So we are actually referring to that chars. Now the substring is a method in JavaScript that extracts characters between two positions, a starting point and an ending point. So you can see why there are two different things I put into the bracket there. Random number, comma, random number plus 1. So those are two different parameters I put there. So random number is the starting point and random number plus 1 is the ending point. So logically by now, I'm sure you should understand what I'm trying to do here. But if you don't still understand, I will try to expatiate more. So let's imagine a scenario where 0 was actually the random number generated. So that means the starting point for that line is going to be 0 and the ending point will be 0 plus 1. That's 1. So what that just means is substring should just pick out the first thing inside chars because 0 is the starting point. So pick out the first thing in chars. Now if you go to and look at our chars variable we created, the first thing there, which is coincidentally is also 0. So it's going to pick out 0 and it's going to end where the second parameter is 0 plus 1, end at 1. Now when you use the substring method does not include the ending point. So it's just going to put the starting point. Now to this point in our code, we have successfully created a code that can generate random numbers for us, but we've not actually found a way to put it into our browser. So let me put that down now. So with this piece of code we have on the screen now, whenever we click on the generate button, like you can see, it should generate a random number for us anytime we click on the generate button. Now that we are done with the generating of the password, now let's go to the other button there, the copy button. So I'm going to create a function here. I'll call it the copy password function. And what this function is going to do is that whenever you click on the copy button, it is going to copy that password that is just generated into our clipboard so we can paste it wherever I want to paste it. So yeah, I'm going to be using some inbuilt JavaScript functions. Let me just write the code down so I will explain to you guys. So first, I created a variable called copy text and I put my password into it. That document.getElementById password is just getting my password from my HTML. Now on the next line, I have the copy text.select method. Now the select method is just used for selecting every text. Now I put it on my copy text, so that means I want to select every text on my password. Now on the last line of my code, I have the document.exec command method. Now what this one just does is, this is the actual method that actually copies that text into our clipboard. It's just an inbuilt function in JavaScript. So time to test the copy button on my browser now. So as you can see, both the generate and the copy button both work now. So we've reached the end of this project today. So if you have any question, any comment, please feel free to drop it down in the comments.
Now that we are done with the random password generator, let's create a dice roller.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're about to play a board game and you can't find the dice anywhere? In this video today, I'm going to be showing you how to create your very own dice roller. Okay, first I'm going to pull up with the HTML. Okay, so the only things I will need to talk about here are just the input tags. So my first two input tags are going to represent my two dice. You can see the ID there. I ID the first one die 1, and the second input tag I gave it an ID of die 2. While the last input tag I gave it an onClick attribute, which you call a function, a roll dice function when clicked on. So with this we can move on to the JavaScript now. So now I'm going to create the roll dice function, which my roll dice button is supposed to call. Now I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to call this function the random number function. Now the reason why I'm creating this function is because of the kind of project we're actually working on. This function is going to generate different random numbers for us, and I will show you how it's going to work now. So I'm going to ask this function to return something whenever it is called. So return math.floor math.random times 6. So the math.random method here return numbers from 0 and 1. So decimals included. Now I'm multiplying it by 6 because I want a number from the range of 0 to 6. Now what math.floor outside just does is that it's going to round up the number to the nearest whole number. So I think by now you should understand what I'm trying to do there. I'm just trying to limit the range of the numbers that actually show up. That's why I multiplied it with 6. Now that that's understood, let's now continue with the code. So document.getElement by ID. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the two different dies from my HTML and equate them to that function. So that what I'm trying to do here is both of them are always going to call that function random number, and whenever they call the function, a random number will be returned back to them. So by now we're ready to test it in our browser. As you can see, I'm clicking on the roll dice button and it is changing different random numbers. So if you have any thoughts or opinion, you can feel free to put it down in the comments.
Since we are done with the dice roller, our final project for this video will be a binary to decimal calculator.
In this video, we are going to be creating a binary to decimal calculator. So we're going to kick off with the HTML. Okay, so I think most of what we need to understand here are those two input tags I put in my HTML. The first input tag, in which I give it an ID of binary, is where the user is supposed to type the binary code in, while the other input tag, which I give an ID of decimal, is where the output decimal is going to show up. So with that being clear, let's jump straight into the JavaScript. So in my JS file, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function and I'm going to name it converter. Now this is a function that's actually going to do the whole converting from the binary to the decimal. So let me call it in my HTML. So I'm going to put it on the first input. I'm going to use the onInput attribute or the onInput event listener. OnInput just means whenever anything changes about the input tag, just call whatever function you put in it. So whenever the input tag updates itself anyhow, it just calls the converter function. So the next step is to try to get the first input tag in our HTML. So let binary equals to document.getElement by ID binary.value, because I'm trying to get the value inside that input tag. Now before we actually create the code that is going to convert it from the binary to the decimal, I want us to try and create a restriction that allows the user to only write in 1 and 0s because we're dealing with binaries. Now this is totally optional. If you don't want to add it to your code, you can just skip to the end of the video to get how to convert it from the binary to decimal. So now I'm going to create a new variable called the new binary variable. Now I will explain what this means later, but I'm just going to equate this to an empty string because we're going to use it later. And you're going to see why I equated it to an empty string. So now I'm going to create a loop that will run for the amount of characters that are inside the binary input. So now for an if statement, if binary square bracket I is ever equals to 1, now we already know that this loop is going to run for the amount of characters that are inside binary. So let's imagine a scenario where binary had 4 characters. Let's imagine those characters as 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now I wrote if binary I is equals to 1. So that means the first time this loop is running, it's going to be checking if binary, and at that point I will be 0. So if binary 0 is equals to 1, and we know according to our scenario the first character in binary is going to be 1, so it is going to match. So if it's equal to 1, then new binary plus equals string 1. So I am trying to add 1 to binary. Now I'm considering the fact that something might be there before. That is why I use the plus equals, not just equals. And I also put 1 as a string. so that it doesn't actually add it to a number if a number was actually there before. So with this now, it's just going to concatenate. So if another number was there and I try to add one, it's just going to be side by side. The numbers will stand side by side. Now in summary, what we're just trying to do is whenever the browser notices the user types in 1 in the input tag, the first input tag, the browser should actually take that one and save it into new binary. Now since we have done for 1, let's also do for 0 since we are dealing with binary. So we're going to create the code that whenever a user types in 0, you should take that 0 and save it somewhere that is inside new binary. So we see the same method with 1, just exactly the same method, but this was going to be in an else if statement. Now that we have picked all the 1s and 0s the user might try to type into the binary input tag, let's now put all the 1s and 0s back into that input tag now. So I just did document.getElement by id binary.value equals to new binary. So whenever the user actually tries to type into the binary input, our browser will always try to put new binary into that binary input. And we only know that new binary is only going to consist of 1s and 0s. So if the user tries to actually type in any other number, it will look as if the browser is not allowing the user to type it in, but in the back the browser is just actually equating new binary which only consists of 1s and 0s. Now that we've done that, let's now create the code that will actually convert the binary to decimal. So I'm going to go get my decimal input from my HTML. So that is document.getElement by id decimal dot the value. So I'm talking to the value inside that input tag equals to pass int new binary comma 2. Now you might not understand what I just did now. Let me explain. Now the pass int method takes in a binary and a radix parameter which was 2 and returns a number back to us. So that's why I passed in new binary, because new binary would only consist of 1s and 0s. So to convert a binary to a decimal is not actually hard. Just using the passInt method and putting the radix of 2, you have converted your binary to a decimal already. So let's test this out in our browser now. As you can see, as I'm typing in the numbers, the decimals are showing because of the way we built our code. It displays as the input change because of the onInput attribute I put into the input tag in the HTML. The onInput attribute is actually the one calling the converter function. So whenever my input tag is updated, it calls the converter function. Even if it's just one character that has been added or has been removed, it calls the converter function immediately. So we've reached the end of this project today. If you have any thoughts or opinions, feel free to put them down in the comments. And also the files for this project, you can get them in the link in the description below. If you also want to watch videos like this and other videos relating to other programming languages, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. See you later. Bye.